Hey everyone, welcome back to Herb Rally. My name is Mason Hutchison. I'm your host. Today's episode is another edition of the Herbalist Hour, and this time I'm joined by Lindsey Feldpausch. So Lindsey is a clinical herbalist and the Programs Coordinator for the Herbal Academy, and we've long time partnered with the Herbal Academy over the years, so it was great to have Lindsey on the show. I've also had the opportunity to hang out with Lindsey over the years at the Great Lakes Herb Fair twice now, and then also got to hang out with her over at the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine in Low Gap, North Carolina. That's Thomas Easley's school. So it was awesome to catch up with Lindsey, and we chat about how she got into herbalism, who some of her mentors have been, her role at the Herbal Academy, dandelion, supplementation, advice for the aspiring herbalist, and a whole lot more. I really enjoyed this conversation with Lindsey. It's definitely super information-packed, lots of inspiration. So yeah, I think you're really going to love it. I will leave a link to the Herbal Academy in the podcast show notes if you'd like to check out more of their offerings. But we get into quite a bit of it in the episode today. And before we get into the show, I'd like to tell you about the upcoming Florida Herbal Conference. Now, this is March 1st to the 3rd, 2024, so it's coming up and is held in Lake Wales, Florida. I've actually been to this event a couple times. It's awesome. And this year they are hosting two keynote speakers. That is Mimi Prunella Hernandez and Seven Song. I just interviewed Mimi for the Herbalist Hour, and Seven Song was way back in episode 69. There will also be musical guests of Holy River. Plus there's a lineup of amazing teachers, yoga, plant walks, as always, a youth program, and Chef Hugo will be back with some nutritious, delicious food. So to get the full schedule and to register, go to floridaherbalconference.org. One more time, that's floridaherbalconference.org. I will leave a link at the very tippy top of today's podcast show notes, and it is, one last time, it's March 1st to the 3rd, 2024 in Lake Wales, Florida. Thanks to the Florida Herbal Conference supporting the Herbalist Hour. Also would like to thank our presenting sponsor, and that is, of course, Oshala Farm. If you're looking to purchase organic dried herbs that are grown right here in the United States, look no further than Oshala Farm. They grow and sell over 80 medicinal plant species on their website, oshalafarm.com. They also have herbal tea blends, elixirs, organic hydrosols, and a lot more. So learn more about Oshala Farm at oshalafarm.com. And thank you to all of the good folks over there for your support of the Herbalist Hour. And last but certainly not least, I'd love to thank our Herb Rally Schoolhouse members. Thank you, each and every one of you, for your support in helping Herb Rally keep putting out this programming and classes and everything else we're trying to do here at Herb Rally. So thanks so much, y'all. Really means a lot to us. And that's going to do it for me today. Enjoy today's episode with herbalist Lindsey Feldpausch. Talk to you soon.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm really excited to have on my good friend, Lindsey Feldpausch. Welcome to the show, Lindsey.
Thanks for having me, Mason. I'm excited to be here.
Stoked to have you on. We just got a chance to hang out at the Great Lakes Herb Fair. What'd you think of that event?
It's my favorite. We've been a part of the Great Lakes Herb Fair since the beginning, and I love it. It feels like a return to an herbal home each year.
Yeah, I was so excited to go back to. I want to say the last time I was there was 2017. So 6 years later, I was able to join y'all again. And is it your husband, the chef for that event as well?
Yeah, he is. He has received such great compliments through that experience. He's been cooking for the Great Lakes Herb Fair for the majority of the years it's been happening. And, I have so many people come up to me afterwards and they're like, this is the best food I've ever had at an herb conference. And that's saying something from people who've been going to herb conferences for like 20, 30 years. So yeah, it's been really fun to have him be a part of that because, he's kind of a quasi herbalist, as in, he's been along on this journey with me the entire time, but to have him really participating and utilizing his skill sets to share with that community has been really fun.
Yeah, it's fun to watch the kitchen staff and their elements, and the food is so delicious, but it's also very nourishing as well. So sometimes at various herb conferences, it feels like you're just eating school cafeteria food or whatever, but at the Great Lakes Herb Fair, absolutely delicious. I didn't know we were going to get into the Great Lakes Herb Fair right off the bat, but if you want to learn more about the event, we'll probably be there next year. I'm assuming Lindsay will be there as well. That's greatlakesherbfair.org. Happens every September in Michigan. And yeah, what a lovely event. But awesome. Well, let's start at the beginning, Lindsay. What were you like as a kiddo?
Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan, so that is where I'm from. I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and really a typical suburban upbringing. I did not spend a ton of time thinking about plants, though we certainly played outdoors. But I was a reader. I feel like I escaped a lot into fiction in a beautiful way. But as far as my connection to nature went, it really wasn't until I was a bit older that I really jumped into the plant world. I feel like in the suburbs, it's not something that is really potent in that upbringing. I do remember my happiest childhood memories being in the woods of northern Michigan, where my great grandfather had built a cabin, and thinking back on my childhood and remembering summers spent there and the amount of peace found in the woods, and the stress reduction that comes with spending time in nature was really I think a big part of my ability to transition into the herbalism and plant world later on, but certainly not a big part of my upbringing at that time. So
When you say Upper Michigan, or Northern Michigan, are you referring to the Upper Peninsula? Being a new Midwesterner myself, I discovered
yeah.
the beauty of the Upper Peninsula. But yeah, is that what you're referring to?
So I was in the Lower Peninsula in the Manistee National Forest,
Sure.
and yes, that's like Lake Michigan, East Coast or West Coast side of here.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, so
Probably equally beautiful.
it's a really special place.
Sure. So
Mhm.
let's get more into like your herbalism background. When did you kind of full-fledged dive into herbalism, and who have been some of your mentors along the way?
Yeah, what a fun story. I think we all have our beginners, place where we kind of enter into this world. And some people, I feel like a lot of herbalists are like, oh, I was, a young child and I was picking dandelions and making potions. And that just wasn't my experience. What happened for me was I went to college in Detroit and ended up spending the majority of my 20s in the city. And where I lived in Detroit was in a collective living house. So it was this old Victorian mansion. And me and 12 of my friends lived in this giant house. And it was my first experience in gardening. So I started growing plants, as in food, vegetables. And it was amazing for me to be like, oh, this is lettuce, this is kale. And, we can put our energy and efforts into growing these plants and deriving food and nourishment from it. So when I kind of broke that green wall in the vegetable world, I actually was like, wait, if these plants are so fantastic, like what about all these other plants around us? So I remember the side street that this house was on was called Sycamore Street. And I didn't even know that like the trees lining the street were sycamore maples, right? So I was like, wow, this is fascinating. And so there were a couple people in my life at that time who were already interested in herbalism. We did have like a small plot of medicinal plants on this land. And so I remember like making my first tinctures. With like wormwood and experiencing mugwort, and I was recommended by one of these friends to read the book Botany in a Day. So Botany in a Day and David Hoffman's Holistic Herbal were my first herb books, and I just remember getting those books and just diving right in and feeling like it opened me up in a way that I couldn't have foreseen. So I've got these books and I'm starting to learn plant identification through Botany in a Day. And that summer, my husband, who, was not my husband at the time, but him and I hiked 200 miles on the Appalachian Trail. And I only brought 2 books with me. I brought The Hobbit and I brought Appalachian Plants Identification book. So we spent a whole month hiking and all we did was walk. And it was the first time that I really was able to immerse myself in nature in such a way, and also plant identification. So being excited about all of these new plants that I'm seeing in these books and that I've maybe read about, and then, finding like ramps for the first time and just being like, just so enthralled in that world. So my husband and I get back from this trip and we're hanging out at the collective living house. So we moved back in there after hiking the Appalachian Trail, and we had a friend visiting, and I was catching up with this friend and I was like, what are you doing? And they're like, da, da, da. And they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm thinking about studying herbalism. Like, I'm really interested in this field. And this friend was like, oh, well, you got to meet Thomas Easley. He's one of my best friends and he lives in Alabama and he'll totally let you come move to his farm and like teach you. So it just was such a fun coincidence that, this person connected me to one of their dear friends. And I, had a phone conversation with Thomas and he was like, yeah, come on down. So my husband and I moved to Alabama, where I proceeded to do a clinical training apprenticeship with Thomas. And that involved me sitting in on his clinic. At this point, Thomas was pretty far advanced in his herbal experience. He had a full-time clinic. So we're sitting in consultations like multiple days a week, like seeing 8 clients a day. He was doing a month school in his home. And so I joined that and I did some really intensive self-study. And yeah, so this was many months experience and kind of really started off. So for me, I think that I wasn't necessarily I didn't know enough at this time to know which route I wanted to take in herbalism. I was really called by the plants themselves and just interested in that field of study. But because what Thomas said was clinical herbalism, I really dove right in and then spent the next decade working with Thomas. So, I studied with him and trained with him and then ended up working with him for the next decade. So he was very pivotal in my herbal education and experience. So, Thomas, at one point in time, we had moved back to Michigan and we had our son, and we were actually living in the cabin that my great-grandfather built in the Manistee National Forest. And I, at that point, actually studied with Jim McDonald. So Jim has his Lindera year course. So it is a weekend a month, and it is going from the clinical experience that I received into Jim's energetic herbalism was just such a wonderful pairing. I highly respect Jim as an herbalist. He is absolutely one of my favorite herbal educators and mentors. And so, yeah, I got to take his training program and really opened my eyes to more in-depth energetic herbalism. And that paired so well with clinical herbalism, because I feel like as herbalists, we can move into the clinical realm and kind of forget the energetic side. But I think we can do so much with the energetic herbalism. And so he opened my eyes and widened my perspective in that way. And then, one day I got a call from Thomas and he was like, hey, we're thinking about buying 500 acres in North Carolina and starting a clinical intensive training program. Like, will you guys come and help us start this program? So yeah, we spent 5 years in North Carolina. We had no idea where we were going. Like, we were just like, yeah, like, you can make this happen. Like, we'll do it. So that was 5 years where we ran a clinical intensive training program, and that program has since ceased it ended with the pandemic. But 5 years of having, for 1 year, we would have students come live with us on this mountain. It was an old boys camp. So it had, you've been there, Mason.
I have. Yep.
Yeah.
I remember.
So, there was lots of cabins and there was a lodge and we had classroom space. And so we were able to bring students in for this intensive training program. And really it was based off of the clinical apprenticeship that I had done. And then Thomas had subsequent students come and learn with him. And so the idea is that through immersion, you could really gain a greater sense of, or really greater understanding of how to be a clinical herbalist. It's like learning a language, right? So instead of doing Duolingo on your phone for 10 minutes a day, you move to, a Spanish speaking country and you can learn the language much faster. So that's what we did. So I was one of the lead instructors alongside Thomas and, focused on medicine making, materia medica within clinical modules as well, and was the free clinic director there for a few years until I passed that off to my dear friend Mel Casting, who is currently still in that role. And yeah, it was a great experience for me. And I felt like so pivotal in growing as a clinical herbalist. It was at this time that I applied for the RH with the AHT and received that designation, which I think is a really valuable program for, us herbalists to hold each other to high standards within our profession. And so that was my experience in North Carolina. And yeah, I would say as far as other herbal mentors go, Matthew Wood was pretty pivotal. In some of my trainings, he taught with us at the Eclectic Schools intensive training program. And I feel like his books, Guido Masse, even though I've never really got to study in depth with Guido, he did some courses for us at the Eclectic School, and reading his book, The Wild Medicine Solution, was just such a heartfelt dive into the world of plants. And it really connects, his perspective really connects with me. So I would say those are some pivotal people in my world as well.
Yeah, you have a great balance of teachers there. I like when you were describing Thomas's approach and then taking gym school, and it kind of gave you a new lens of how to, discuss herbs with your clients. Just a quick break from the show to thank our presenting sponsor, Oshala Farm. Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant certified organic herb farm based in Southern Oregon, where they grow and sell over 80 different plant species. The founders, Elise and Jeff Higley, have been longtime friends, so I highly trust their growing methods and ethics. You'll love the potency and vibrancy of all the herbs they have to offer. To learn more and purchase their herbs and other organic goods, head to oshalafarm.com. So thanks once again to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. Now back to the show. Enjoy. I do kind of want to go back in the day here for a quick second. You mentioned wormwood and mugwort, both Artemisia species. And I was just kind of curious, did you just randomly bring those plants up, or were those both like heavily influential plants for you in your early journey?
Yeah, I would say that those were the plants that were growing in the medicine garden that we had at this collective living house. And so I think that they definitely awoke something in me because they were the first tinctures that I made, and I remember actually have saved the bottle where I wrote, kind of what these plants were used for, and taking mugwort before the tincture before going to sleep to try and induce dreams. And I think that the nature of bitters can really reconnect us to the plant world, right? I think it's the bitter flavor, it induces this wildness in us that we kind of have lost in our, eternal winter of flavor and sensory experience. So yeah, I would definitely say that was pivotal. It was really good, my first medicine making experience. And medicine making is something that I really cherish as an herbalist. So medicine making for me it's chemistry, right? It's solvents and it's extraction and it's, all of this science side, but then it's also the magic of plants and tying those into medicine making and also formulation, which I love doing. I feel like we all have areas within our fields that feel like really core parts of who we are. And I do feel like medicine making and formulation is one of those for me. So, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we actually have a formulation question for you later on in the show, so stay
Ooh.
tuned. Yeah. But in your bio, well, thank you for sharing a bit about your history. I also want to say Guido Massey, I'll second the, what is it, the Wild Medicine Solution. I want to say
Yeah.
he has a whole section on bitters in that book.
Mhm.
And yeah, what a fantastic book. I'll try to remember to leave a link to that book in the show notes. But in your bio on your website, I want to say it's plantmatters.org. Did I get that
Mhm.
right?
Correct.
You say you believe in our innate ability to engage the healing powers of plants, and one of your life's intentions is to kindle that belief in others. So I'm just kind of curious how you could help others kindle that belief.
Yeah, so kind of tying into that statement overall, right? We live in a society that has a disconnect from nature and from plants. We spend more times indoors than we ever have. I think that this loss is really felt, even if it's unknown. So my life experience in connecting with herbalism has given me such meaning in this natural world, like a connection to nature and in the natural world and to plants themselves. And so through education, I do consider myself, an educator. It's one of the things that I absolutely love to do is teach people about plants. And so through education, I feel like we create that connection to plants and also through clinical practice, right? So if somebody comes to you and they're experiencing a set of symptoms that they would love to, have help with, and then you connect them with plants that are able to increase their life well-being. I think that can really serve people, and then they get to go on their own journey from there, so through education and clinical practice, I feel like are the ways in which I do that.
Absolutely. Well, we mentioned plantmatters.org. Now you have a new role at the Herbal Academy. So I'm just kind of curious, what is your title there? What do you do? And tell us a little bit more about the Herbal Academy, who's been longtime partners with Herb Rally. So shout out and thanks to the Herbal Academy for all of the work that we've had the opportunity to participate in throughout the years. But yeah, what's your role over there at the Herbal Academy?
Yeah, so I joined the Herbal Academy last year in a leadership position. My role is Programs Coordinator, and I am so happy to be a part of Herbal Academy. I really feel like they're doing incredible work over there. My focus is in course development. So we are, jumping into this established school, but also being able to bring my experience and my clinical practice into creating all of the offerings that Herbal Academy has brought to the table. Has been a really exciting endeavor.
Yeah.
So one of the exciting things that we have been working on is advancing our clinical trainings. And, over the next year, we're going to be releasing some of that. So I feel like it's been a really beneficial, not only for me to be a part of Herbal Academy, but for Herbal Academy to have brought me on and to be able to work together to really focus on training prospective clinical herbalists in a way that is utilizing science, and the people that are part of this community are doing such great work, and the content creation is incredible. And what I mean by that is, so I have been in this field for a very long time. Never before have I seen the editorial aspect of a school be so on point. So can you imagine creating a course, right? I've created so many courses, and then having four extremely knowledgeable brains come into your course and say, okay, we're going to review every fact and every, um, point that you're making and ensure that it is of the utmost quality. And that's what's happening at Herbal Academy. And it's happening at a really high level. And I think it's just the most valuable thing. So the first course that I worked on with Herbal Academy was the tincture course that we released last year, Tincture Making 101. And I got through with this process and I was just blown away. I was like, wow, I want every single herbal education to go through this process, because I think that you get to, synthesize information and really make sure that what you're putting out there is accurate and of the most, research-based scientific information, but also it has heart. So it's been really fun to work in that on the courses there, and then also exciting advanced clinical trainings upcoming. I also work in developing, the student community there. So Herbal Academy has like a super robust online community called My Herbal Studies. And so all the students get to be a part of this. So I work in there to help build community and work with answering, questions. So we have students who come on all levels, beginner questions to more advanced clinical questions. And so we have this awesome staff of herbalists who come in, and it's been such a joy to work with these incredible herbalists and watch this process and this community blossom and to be a part of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned like the rigor that these different programs go through before you release them to the world. And just knowing Amber, I want to say she's the school director. She's I've been in email contact with her for probably over a decade now, and I feel like everything she does is just so organized. So I imagine with that kind of leadership, it kind of just infiltrates throughout the entire business and the school. And I really admire the way that the Herbal Academy does that, and everything that the Herbal Academy does just seems so top notch. I am curious. I know you're the program coordinator, but are you also one of the herbalists inside of these classes actually teaching? Are you on video teaching these lessons and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been developing course content. It has been ongoing in terms of, it's continuous. We are always doing the next thing, and it's so fun. Like right now I'm working on 5 different videos, instructional videos to include in lessons. And I would like to state, because I think this is so important. So Amber is a co-director. So Amber is incredible. She's so good at her job. And then we have Jane Metzger, who is on the educational side. And so she really oversees a lot of the programs and the course development there. And Lisa Olson is another one. So we have this amazing staff, and we're developing, content. I am definitely an instructor within these courses. I actually just did a really wonderful free series called the Sensory Herbal Approach. And so basically it was a free series that we offered, which Herbal Academy offers so much free content. We obviously have a plethora of paid courses, our foundational herbal courses, and we have short courses, and the herbarium is a wonderful resource, but we also have free offerings. So we have, ebooks, and we have this free series that I am going to touch on was a sensory herbal approach. So it's basically trying to teach students and herbalists how to use our bodies and our felt sensory experiences to learn about herbs, right? So I think that when we first start studying herbs, what we do is we look at a list of herbal actions, and we're like, oh, this herb is anti-inflammatory, and this herb is diuretic, and this herb is that. And we can memorize those herbal actions, and we can look at those lists. And of course, it's going to give us information, but really at the core of what I was teaching in this free series, which is now closed, but will be opened up again in the new year, was how we can take it to a different level. So if we have, and this was absolutely pivotal in my teaching training with Jim, was experiencing an herb in our body and determining those, primary actions, that we can feel that affect our physiology directly, that we can determine through our senses, and then how that leads us to a greater understanding of all the herbal actions that flow from there. So that was a really fun series to put together, and I felt really excited about that offering. And so that was one of the instructional offerings I have been a part of recently.
Yeah, you mentioned it's closed now for that free sensory class, but it'll open up later on in the year, or maybe early 2025 or something like that. I just want to say we'll leave a link to sign up for the Herbal Academy newsletter in the podcast show notes, so that way you could probably find out about a lot of when these like free classes open up and whatnot. Would you say that's the best way to find out about all of the offerings, is the newsletter?
Yeah, absolutely. So the newsletter, not only provides a ton of awesome herbal information, but it also is where we announce all the cool things that we have upcoming. So the sensory herbal approach will be reoffered again in the coming year. So yeah, by signing up for the newsletter, you'll get to know when that is happening.
Nice. Yeah, you mentioned community and herbarium, and I'm just kind of curious, is the community kind of part of the herbarium or vice versa? And I'm actually curious if you could speak a little bit more to what the herbarium is, because I've read about it, but I don't really know all of what's inside. So if you could share more about that.
Yeah, so the herbarium is a annual membership
Okay.
subscription to a database of herbal information. So it includes like a great variety of intensives that are with some awesome herbalists. We just had Mimi Hernandez do an intensive for us. We have Heather Wood Buzzard, who's on staff at the Herbal Academy, do a narrative herbalism. So it's got some really great intensive offerings. It's got a monograph database. So it's like hundreds of herbs that are like really in-depth monographs. It's, not just a few paragraphs.
Right.
Monographs. And yeah, it has articles that vary on herbal topics. And so it's a really it's a vast database of herbal information that you get to key into for annual subscription. Yeah. And then the community, Herbal Academy is, we build a community through our students, and the interactions that we have as a staff and instructors with our students. And we mainly do that on My Herbal Studies, which again is a online platform that we utilize to connect with students and to answer questions and to share resources. And yeah, and we have a group of incredible herbalists who just are daily in this community, really serving our student base.
Awesome. You mentioned Mimi Hernandez. I'm actually interviewing her in 2 days, so I'm very excited about that. She just wrote a book for National Geographic, so excited to check out that a little bit more. Anything else you want to share about the Herbal Academy for now? We could kind of talk about it more around the end of the podcast episode as well.
I would say that one of the things you're talking about Mimi and looking at, Herbal Academy is a staff of 20, there's a great group of people who are on staff, but we are bringing in so many of the top herbal names, and not just, these herbalists are there for a reason, right? They're incredible herbalists with great information to share. So our advanced course and our clinical training instruction is really coming from a lot of these awesome herbalists. And I really love seeing this all kind of come together under this Herbal Academy umbrella.
Absolutely. Well, everything we talk about, of course, as always, links will be in the podcast show notes, the YouTube description, etc. So sweet. Well, we opened the chat talking about the Great Lakes Herb Fair, and I was perusing the website before our convo, and I saw that you taught a class at the Great Lakes Herb Fair on supplements. So I supplement personally myself with magnesium, and I just started taking D3. I never have taken vitamin D supplementation, but from a recommendation, Nick Moya, who was just on the podcast as well, started supplementing with that as well. I'm just kind of curious if you could provide kind of maybe a brief overview of that class, and or could you share some low-hanging fruit as to what supplements folks might look into taking, especially if they're kind of maybe more so on the affordable side.
Yeah, so that class was a assessment of nutritional deficiencies from an herbalist perspective. And so basically I went over the idea that we have nutritional deficiencies and going through, where those arise from. So is it because we are not eating whole foods? Is it because we have, inflammation through our digestive system? So the gut is the seat of health, right? And if our gut isn't functioning well, we're not absorbing the nutrients from our food. And if we're not eating food that is nutrient dense, here's how these deficiencies can manifest. And so, you touched on our top two, right? So we have yeah. So vitamin D is such a broad deficiency across our society. I already mentioned we don't spend enough time outdoors. And then sunscreen, of course, is necessary in so many ways, but when we are outdoors, we're slathered in sunscreen, and then maybe we go take a shower and we wash off the, potential for even vitamin D production, because you can actually wash off the vitamin D. So the sun comes in contact with our skin, and through a chemical reaction, we, create vitamin D and absorb it. And so vitamin D is so important for health. Magnesium is, my top supplement that I recommend. Magnesium is life-changing for so many people. We live in a stressed out, tensed up society, and we're drinking coffee every morning and we're walking around with our shoulders up, and magnesium can help to relax. So we have a very simplified way of calcium kind of constricting our muscles, and magnesium is able to help relax those muscles. So on a simple note, it's a tension relief, but it's involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions in our body, and it has so many great benefits. And, Paul Bergner's, he wrote this short book like 20 years ago on nutritional deficiencies, and I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but he talks about in that book how, monocropping and this monoculture of foods, we have depleted our soil of so many nutrients, including magnesium. So while we used to have foods that might have been rich in this nutrient, are, comparing the content of magnesium and other nutrients to, say, the 1960s to now, we've really depleted our soils of nutrients. And so magnesium is a deficiency that we see very commonly. And then the third supplement I would recommend would be omega-3 fatty acids or fish oils. So we have these fatty acids that are so important in structural development. So the long chain fatty acids help to create tissues that are more flexible. We have the, cytokines are our messengers, right? So they can be pro-inflammatory or they can be anti-inflammatory. So we need these fatty acids to create these anti-inflammatory cytokines to actually tell the inflammatory processes to cease. And I think that fish oils and omega-3s are really important. But to wrap that all up, I actually think that the most important thing is to eat a whole foods diet, right? So make sure that we're getting healthy, make sure that we're getting whole foods. We need the fiber in whole foods. We need the nutrient variation that comes in a highly varied diet. So colorful foods and vegetables, I think that is key. And then ensuring that our gut health is optimal to be able to absorb these nutrients. So we have a lot of work we can do there with herbs as well, right? So gut healing teas are really important here. These vulnerary plants that can help heal any irritation or inflammation that's happening in our intestinal tissues. Bitters are huge, right? So bitters help to stimulate the release of all of our digestive enzymes that we need to break down foods. And so bitters, gut healing teas, optimal gut health, whole foods diet, and if need be, supplementation.
Yeah, for the longest time, I was so hesitant to consume supplements of any sort. I always, relied on my diet and whatnot. And it was only until recently that I started consuming magnesium regularly, vitamin D3 regularly. And I consume a lot of, say, like nourishing herbal infusions and spring water and this and that. So I always feel like I'm getting adequate nutrition. But even then, I still feel like when I consume the magnesium powder, you talk about that calming effect. I think it's really important for me specifically, at least, to even still supplement it with magnesium powder. I take the natural calm stuff, but so what I'm hearing you're saying is try to consume a whole foods diet, a varied whole foods diet where you're getting all sorts of nutrients from many different plants and so on. And for instance, I also I consume sardines quite a bit as well. Do you think what I'm getting at is, even with like a varied whole foods diet, do you think it still could be potentially wise to supplement your diet with, say D3 or magnesium or fish oil?
Yeah, I think that if you're eating sardines 3 times a week, you probably don't need to take a fish oil supplement, right?
It's way cheaper too. Yeah. Well, absolutely. I would think, yeah.
Yeah, it is, right?
Yeah.
And there are beneficial aspects to receiving those nutrients in their whole form, right? Versus the extraction. And sardines are beneficial because they're on the smaller end of the food chain, right? So when we move up to the larger fish, cold water fatty fishes are really where we're going to get those high omega-3 content. We have the higher, mercury content because they're consuming all the smaller fishes. So when we move down the scale to sardines, we're kind of removing that toxicity, though that's not really what it would be, the, buildup of potential toxins that are found in our, ocean environments. And then you have the omega-3 fatty acids that are coming in that protein packet. So yeah, as far as magnesium goes, kind of touched on this already. It just depends on how much is in those foods you're eating, because you could still be eating, a diet that should be rich in magnesium, but really not getting enough. And so for me, then it would be like, how do you feel when you take a supplement? Right.
Good point.
To touch on, my clinical experience, I mean, I have seen so many life-changing results with magnesium and omega-3s that are really almost instantaneous. Like I'm talking a few weeks to a month, where it's like, wow, this really helped. Personally, for me, I feel like magnesium is anxiety reducing. I feel like, the catastrophic thinking where you just kind of get into that, like, oh, things are potentially gonna go wrong. And I feel like if I forget to take my magnesium, then I kind of feel those like anxiety or catastrophic thinking kind of start to creep back in. I'm like, ooh, I didn't take my magnesium. So anyway, that's what's really been life-changing in my personal life.
Totally. You brought up Paul Bergner earlier too, and I feel like every time I've taken a class with him, it kind of always ends up boiling down to varied diet, movement, and sleep. So if you get those pillars, those are really like the top 3 supplements you could have anyways. So, well, sweet. Thank you for sharing all that. I think it's time we move on to our secret special guest question part of the show.
Hello, Mason and Lindsay. I think I want to say hello, and I love you both very much. I think you're amazing people doing awesome things in the herbal world. So hello, and thank you for being my friend, and thank you, Mason, for inviting me to ask Lindsay a question in this interview. And I know Lindsay to be what I consider like a master formulator. Not only does she have like wicked in-depth knowledge of the plants themselves, she also has an incredible palate for both aromatics and flavor. And the question I have for Lindsay is if she could share a little bit about her process in investigating the quantities and the different components of some of the amazing blends that she makes, like her herbal spices and the culinary salts and the cordials. Oh my gosh, your cordials are amazing. So just to like a little bit more about what your process is and like calling these together and getting them to taste so absolutely epic. And thanks.
I love Erica. That was great.
So that was from Erica Gallatin with Sovereignty Herbs. You can learn more about Erica at sovereigntyherbs.com. But all right, well, let's hear it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like formulation there's this clinical side of formulation, right? Where it's like you have your materia medica and well how these herbs work, how they affect the physiology of human and how that interplays with energetics. And so with clinical herbalism and like formulating for clients, I feel like it's a different process than the side that Erica is asking about, which is really like that. It comes from somewhere else. It's almost like intuition. I know how herbs taste and I know how they feel and I know how they're going to play together. And they come in almost like a dream state. And by that, I mean, like, I'll have intuitive hits. And I think that intuition is a collection of knowledge, right? So it's these little subtle clues and knowledge bases that you have that you pair together. But a lot of times in my formulation for products, it's coming from this place of just like creative dreaming, so I have a everything nettle seasoning, and it's like an everything seasoning salt that I made. And I was like, oh, nettle, like putting nettle powder with everything bagel seasoning. It's just like this hit that came out of nowhere. I wasn't like formulating that. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to take an herb and I'm going to see where I can go with this. I think that really a lot of times I'll have a herb that I want to work with. And then I will have the pairings just pop in, and I think that is from experience and from knowing the plants, and that formulation comes from like a place of love for these herbs and wanting them to like shine through in the products themselves. So I made a cordial at the Great Lakes Herb Fair, which Mason, I think you tried. It was it was a cacao, reishi, cinnamon, hawthorn cordial. And I had such a lovely time sharing that. And Margie Flint, what a joy it was to share that with her, and her to look at me and say, these are all the herbs that I need. And she shared with me at that time why she needed them, but ended up basically ordering like a gallon of this cordial.
Oh my gosh.
Like came home and just made Margie this like giant batch of cordial that she then was able to utilize for her own usage. And I think that, like, again, the clinical formulation is different, but product formulation, and it's more like plant love based formulation, is it feels like it comes from like a different place.
Yeah, it sounds like when I'm in the kitchen, I'm just a little dash of this, a little dash of that. I love how you said it came, almost from like a dreamlike state. So let's say you are getting creative, making these formulas, or just kind of freestyling them and then just creating based on intuition. Are you then later on writing down that actual recipe so you could go back and just recreate it over and over again?
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
I have learned my lesson.
Right.
And not documenting the magical creations that have now disappeared off into the ether. Absolutely. Yes, I do a very good job at this point in my life of tracking. And, even with like parts or amounts, it's based on knowing the herb and what I want the end result to be. And again, flavor and, understanding how that will all play into a formula. But it's not like within that realm of formulation, I'm never going to like research how much reishi should be in this cordial, or it's like really like understanding the role that herb is playing within a formula and how much I want it to be a part of. And I do agree, it is culinary. My husband's a chef, right? Like
right.
It's very much that like kitchen magic and creation.
Y'all are eating good. Y'all are drinking good. Great question, Erica. One more time, I want to shout out Erica's website. It's sovereigntyherbs.com. If I got that right. She also has a really cool membership area called the Herbal Practice Connection, where she'll bring in various guests each month and talk about a different clinical herbalism aspect. I want to say, Lindsay, you've even participated in the Herbal Practice Connection. So great
resource. So we have so much of the training that goes into becoming a clinical herbalist is the education component, right? It's so important to find the right line of study for you and what fits. And I do think that Herbal Academy has some really top-notch clinical training, but Erica is doing the mentorship side of things, right? So she's really taking these people who have done the education side and she's taking them to the next level through this mentorship program. And I was able to do a formulations course for her, and it was a clinical formulations, which again, I had said was kind of different than the product creation, but I taught that for her. And I think it's a really highly valuable resource and really necessary for, movement. There's so many people who are interested in herbalism these days. I mean, even when I started like, a dozen years ago in herbalism, like it was not popular.
Right.
And now it is such a large, this subculture of which we were a part of has just grown to such a great amount. And so I think that we really need the education side of things and this like highly informed educational training opportunities. And then we need people like Erica doing the mentorship to lead us into clinical practice.
Absolutely. And earlier on, you were talking about your experience studying with Thomas Easley and then Jim McDonald and Matthew Wood and all of the above. And I say this probably ad nauseum on the show, but I think it's really important to take apprenticeships from various herbalists and study on, different online herbalism platforms and get as much various herbal education as you can. So that's actually one of the great things about Herbal Academy is there's so many different offerings on y'all's website. So, but yeah, I can't promote that enough. I've taken a couple different herbalism apprenticeships myself, and you get, various different styles everywhere you go, and you always glean new information. You're never bored learning herbalism. There's always so much to learn. So, awesome. Well, yeah, shout out Erica. Did you have some follow-up to that?
So Erica and I are both a part of the educational committee for the American Herbalist Guild, right? So this is a committee that is, the work that we're doing is to really focus on the educational component of the RH experience. So registered herbalists with the American Herbalist Guild. And so that education component is so important, not only for before becoming a clinical herbalist, but also as a clinical herbalist, how you continue to educate yourself and gain new knowledge and information. So that has been a really exciting project that I joined in on last year. So
awesome. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about purchasing your herbal products. Can you buy your products on plantmatters.org, or where do you get those, wonderful creations that you're making?
Yeah, I do not currently sell online.
Okay.
Person, but if I do, I'll let you know. I've thought about it, but it's a lot to do. And what I love about the product creation is it's that maker side, right? That creative side, and then also the connection to people in person, right? So we get to go to conferences and we get to connect and hang out, and I get to share, products and be excited about that in-person connection. And so, yeah, the online shop is maybe a thing in the future. We'll see.
Fair enough. Yeah, you're juggling a lot as an herbalist. So, well, I've been trying to do this new thing where I want to ask the guests, the herbalists, about one particular plant over and over again and just see if we kind of get, through lines talking about one particular plant. Maybe you could share, we'll hear different stories about the plant. So I've been starting with dandelion. It's one of my personal favorites. So I want to say you even have a dandelion monograph on your website, if I recall correctly. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but do you have anything you'd like to share about dandelion? Any stories or just general, just what's dandelion? Dandelion's virtues, if you will.
Yeah. Mason, didn't you get a dandelion tattoo?
I did. Here, for those watching on YouTube, I'll show it off right here.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm going to show that. Yeah. Oops, that way.
I also, this is the only plant that I have tattooed on my body. So.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So yeah, dandelion is like, what an incredible plant, right? I think that to me, dandelion speaks to the wildness in us all, right? And I feel like if we look at dandelion from this bigger picture, right, it's this plant that has traversed continents. It is so pernicious, and it's the way it shows up in the world. And I think that there's two sides to the way that you can view dandelion. And it's, really quite obvious when we think about it. Like on one side, we can look at dandelion as this, root to flower, wild edible, replete with so much nutrients. And then on the other side of things, it's the poster child for Roundup. I mean, it's literally on the bottle, right? So we have these people who are fighting dandelion and trying to get it out of their lawns. And it's like, gosh, what a boring concept that is, to want to have this pristine landscape and to remove this like wonderfully nutritious and highly beneficial plant. So, dandelion is absolutely a love of mine. I feel like it has helped me to, as I spoke earlier about kind of bitters in general, I think they do open up that wildness in us, eating a dandelion green after like a long winter, and they're actually like quite good tasting when they first pop up in terms of their flavor profiles. I think it just reawakens us into that connection to nature. I think clinically I use dandelion as one of my favorite classic bitters, right? It is wonderful for liver stasis. So we have a society that metabolically is really stagnant. And I think that, fatty, like non-alcoholic fatty liver is rampant within our society. And we could certainly get into, though I don't think we will, all that goes into this, metabolic and blood sugar dysregulation, and really this leading into, liver stagnation. And dandelion, along with other fantastic bitters, help to move out that stagnation and kind of reawaken this organ and body system. And I feel like that is one of the ways in which I love to use dandelion. Dandelion also has the fiber side of things. So it has inulin, the soluble fiber that feeds our gut microbiome. And we all know how important that is. So I feel like we get so much from dandelion. And the fact that we almost have like a society taking, a pitchfork to it, it's like a modern day witch hunt of dandelion. Is just so fascinating when you think about it. So I love dandelion. I think everyone should have more dandelion in their lives and in their yards. And yeah,
we talked about supplements earlier, and probiotics was all the rage maybe a decade ago. Now we're moving into the prebiotic phase, and you don't need a supplement with prebiotics. You just need to consume things like dandelion or burdock and whatnot. So
yeah, I mean, really what we need is whole foods, right? So we need the
Amen.
soluble and insoluble fibers, because both of those, and we live in a world with highly ultra processed foods. I've been really geeking out on Robert Lustig. He is a pediatric endocrinologist, and basically he's like my new hero. He's fantastic. So he's basically spent his entire career working with children with metabolic disorders, and he is linking it all back to our ultra processed foods, right? And this high sugar intake. And where I'm going with that is that when we process foods, we remove the fibers, the insoluble and soluble fibers, and we remove the fibers, we increase the sugar content. Fibers help to slow down our absorption of glucose. So, but in doing so, we're basically just getting these like sugar hits. And we're doing this to our children. And anyways, whole foods get both, so unrefined foods, and then herbs like dandelion and the fiber found within.
So Robert Lustig.
Yeah.
I'll have to look into him. I've never heard of his work. Just because it's top of mind, do you teach nutrition courses ever? I'd love to check one of those out someday. Or do you have any offerings through the Herbal Academy as far as nutrition goes?
Not as of yet, but definitely is a potential. Yeah, I would say that I've taught nutrition from an herbalist perspective. I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian at a number of conferences and for some different online schools, but I don't have any offerings to put out there right now for you.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, you've mentioned being a clinical herbalist a few times. You wear a lot of different hats as an herbalist, and sometimes I'll ask our guests if you have any advice for like the budding or aspiring clinical herbalist. So, Lindsay, do you have any advice for the aspiring clinical herbalist?
Yeah, I would say that you really have to find the right line of education for you, right? So really going into this with the desire to find the right herbal education. Herbal Academy is a really wonderful offering. I would also say that when you're studying herbalism, I think we see a lot of people trying to be clinical herbalists really start to kind of toe that line between practicing medicine, right? So they're really just looking at things from this like Western medicine perspective and then applying herbs versus pharmaceuticals. And I'm not saying that like the this for that approach doesn't work in some cases, but really what I think that differentiates a good clinical herbalist is the ability to both know the physiological side of things and how herbs are impacting our bodies, but also using an energetics paradigm, because that's really what we do as herbalists. We are able to look at what are energetics? Well, it's the quality, the condition of a person or a plant, and how we can compare those together. So when you are looking to be a clinical herbalist, don't neglect the energetic paradigm, because this is truly where our tradition comes from. We have had herbal practice throughout. It's omnipresent in all cultures throughout the history of our species. And every single culture has their own energetic paradigm, which they have developed through the use of our sensory experience, and then how plants interact with us and with their own, energetics offerings. So yeah, look at, get the clinical training, but also the energetic side. Don't forget it.
Well said. What are some of the challenges of being an herbalist? It's not all just running through fields of lavender. So, what would you what would you say are some of the challenges?
I would say that finding enough time to be with the plants.
Ooh,
Personally,
so yeah, so good.
like we all have such busy lives, and
Yeah.
we're here because we love plants. And yet I want to spend so much more time with them than I do. I think being an herbalist looks like so many different things, right? And maybe the gardener herbalists and the people who get to work directly with plants, they get more of that connection. But I certainly wish that I had more time with plants. And then, I think that for beginners, like one of the hard things about becoming an herbalist or being an herbalist is really knowing what path to take. And I think that is a challenge that I see in herbal education, right? So it's like people come into this world and they're like, I don't know, it's so foreign. Yeah, and I think that using schools like Herbal Academy to really help guide you can be very beneficial in the experience for people moving from beginner, but with these big desires to be clinical herbalists.
How do you suppose the path starts becoming clear as you kind of work towards what maybe your heart is calling you to do? Because just looking at my own journey, I could kind of follow the breadcrumbs now. At the time, yeah, it did feel kind of lost, or like the world was so wide open. But then I kind of feel as you progress on, you kind of do get called in certain directions. I don't want to say like making a good living is definitely like necessary. We want to be making a living as an herbalist, but I don't know if that should be the thing necessarily dictating what direction we go in. Do you have any, words on how you could kind of see the path unfolding for folks who are just starting out?
Yeah, I think that really, I think it evolves differently for everyone and
Yeah.
what they take. I would say that if I had advice for people within that, it would be really to kind of listen to what calls to you, right? So I feel like there's a lot of different aspects to being an herbalist, as I already stated. You can be a clinical herbalist, you can be a product creator, you can, selling at farmers market, you can be a educator, you can, so many hats to wear within this field, and just making sure that as you're on this path of like choose your own adventure, right? Like that you're really listening to your heart and what calls to you, because that's what this is, right? Like herbalism is heart's work, and I feel so honored to be able to be within this profession and making a living and working with this incredible team and helping to facilitate like high quality herbal education, which is really, it is heart's work, right? This is, and I think, don't forget the plants, right? Because it is all about that connection to the plants and following your calling.
Well said. Yeah, and you mentioned, one of the major challenges is spending time with the plants. And I was thinking, it's winter time. It's more difficult to spend time with the plants. But then I recalled just the other night, I'm an avid walker, and even though it's snowing right now here in Wisconsin, I went on a walk with my daughter a couple nights ago, and I saw this tree, and I felt compelled to give it a big old hug.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, "Oh, there you go. I'm communing with nature even in the dead of winter here in Wisconsin when it's snowing out." So there's definitely ways to still hang out with the plants, no matter when. But
Mhm.
awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Where would you like to send folks to learn more about you and your work, Lindsay?
Yeah, so right now the vast majority of my energies and efforts are going into Herbal Academy, which feels like such a great fit. Truly can't say enough about how happy I am to be a part of that team. So we're creating a ton of really exciting content over there. You can follow us on the newsletter. You can absolutely register for any of our courses, from free series to short courses to our foundational training programs for aspiring herbalists. Our newsletter, again, is the best place to follow us there. Also, Herbal Academy on Instagram is always sharing a lot of really fantastic information. And I am like swoon worthy. So much
Yeah,
good.
totally.
Yeah, I'm just like, I think that they're like magic over there in
Oh,
the
yeah.
Herbal Academy Instagram world. So yeah, that's absolutely where you'll be seeing me.
Awesome. Yeah, Amanda loves a nice Instagram feed, a nice, beautiful, cohesive Instagram feed, and Herbal Academy definitely has one of the best in the community for sure. Give them a follow at the Herbal Academy, I want to say, but I'll leave a link, or at Herbal Academy, I'll leave a link to that in the podcast show notes. Sweet. Well, any closing thoughts before we wrap up and get out of here?
I'm so excited. I got to hang out with you, Mason. Thank you
That's
so
right.
much for having us. Herbal Alley is such a great resource
Yeah.
for herbalists out there. I certainly often find myself, reading monographs on your
That's
site
cool.
and chiming into some of the podcasts that you're doing. So thanks for being here and doing the awesome work you were doing.
Thank you so much. Well, that's awesome. I think that'll do it for the show then. Thanks, Lindsay, for joining us. Thanks, y'all, for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Herbalist Hour. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Herb Rally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at Herb Rally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from Herb Rally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.